All right, there you are. Okay, I've screwed up just about every technical aspect of this I possibly could. So, well, it's here. I'm here now. Hopefully, hopefully, hmm, hopefully it'll work now. Okie dokie. Where's my? Where did I put sherbet? Once issues. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool. So I started this stream to cover a certain essay that I'd written a while ago, covering the DA's declared plan to enter coalition with the ANC in 2024. Now, if you want to see this, there's actually a link in the article, and there's a link to the article in the description. I should have probably linked the actual conference in the description. So that was, Helen Ziller was for, I think it was a business day, and she announced that she was going to do that as the ANC wane in support, they're going to be forced into coalition, and that they need to pick either the DA or the EFF, and that her argument was it has to be the DA or nothing, And she doesn't want to work with small parties because she thinks small parties are fickle, untrustworthy, and it's really, really nightmarish to manage coalitions of small parties. So, but her having said that beforehand, that she would never enter into a coalition with the ANC unless they met certain requirements, leads me to think that either she's not serious about this being the solution to save the country, or she's not serious in sticking to the party's principles as preconditions for the coalition. So it's got to be one or the other, because the ANC has all of the decision-making capacity in this negotiation. So I wrote this long article trying to explain from every angle why this is a bad idea and what the alternative is. Because it's not, the alternatives aren't plural. There's just one alternative, really. So I'm just going to read this article to you straight, and then you guys can take questions for a bit. I can't do this for too long because I have a stack of citations to correct for an internal research article. So I'll try and keep it. I'll try and make the questions and answers long enough that people can get some meaningful stuff in. But I'm not going to go on forever. Anyway. Here we go. And the article is in the description. It's called The DA's Plan for 2024. There is nothing being done in Nelson Mandela Bay that can't be replicated elsewhere. So, there's a battle for the soul of South Africa. So says Ramaphosa, and so says Helen Ziller. I disagree. It's not a battle for the soul of South Africa, but for the souls of its governing elite, whose wards, the people, are seen as an inconvenient mass of clay upon whom they all hope to work their strange designs. And in this battle, all parties, whether liberal, that's the DA, COPE, Action SA, or Charterist, ANC, EFF, PAC, BLF, differ not in their imagined vision of South Africa, but in the means they prefer for making that South Africa a reality. They all see the future of South Africa as being atheistic, culturally homogenous, egalitarian, English-speaking, and black-dominated. The differences between them, economic models, rights, and constitutional arrangements, are indeed very different. But these are merely the means for achieving this imagined Afro-Saxon South Africa, this Kamakastigland beyond the rainbow. And because they share the same vision of what our country means, those with strongest popular appeal and the greatest control over the levers of power, the most ruthless and expedient, will determine the path forward. That will not be the DA, and it certainly won't be the people, because the only means to achieve the state via liberalism requires suspending democracy. The alternative means confiscating property and crushing liberty. And the only means for holding onto power in South Africa today is through violence, racial grievance, and patronage. These are games the DA will lose, because if they ever acquire the skills and powers to fight on the ANC's level, they will make themselves into something just as rotten and hollowed out. And as they crumble, the hopes for South Africa will fade. I write this article, therefore, to implore whoever is listening in the DA to please reconsider. In Helen Zille's most recent public appearance, she pointed out that the ANC has declined to below 50% of the vote at a national level, and that, as most analysts agree, they are most guaranteed to need coalitions of partners in 2024. Pushed for the solution to being South Africa's woes being a DA-ANC coalition, seeking the moderate reformers in the ANC. She claimed that Cyril Ramaphosa held the same values as her party, but that he was trapped in the ANC, and pointed to a few key public comments at the State of the Nation as evidence, when he complimented the DA on running at least one city well. The core DA strategy is based on the assumption that, as Gwen Ngwenya said, there is nothing being done in the Cape that can't be replicated elsewhere. Well, the DA won Cape Town from the initially unchallenged ANC through a coalition in the 2006 local election, and subsequently won the Western Cape province outright in the 2009 general election. By simply governing better than the willfully negligent and parasitic ANC, the DA managed to win the affections of the coloured population. Now, especially considering the coalition, they believe they can replicate this at the national level. But this is a fallacy. Regardless of the cynical attempts to rebrand under their marionette Mmusi Maimane, the DA is still universally seen as the white party. Cape-coloured people looking forward to the end of white domination voted overwhelmingly for the ANC in '94, but they still voted for the Old Afrikaner Nationalist Party in significant numbers because, well, many feared black domination just as much, and because they were culturally closer to the West than to Africa. After showing themselves to be worse trustees of the coloured community than anybody expected, the ANC were rejected in favour of the only alternative present, which is the DA. But this will not be repeated because the Cape is different and ethnicity matters. If one's tempted to believe that black people will be converted en masse to English liberalism, it's worth paying attention to the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality to be disabused of that illusion. Even with the largest share of the vote, with 46% compared to the ANC's 40%, the DA still saw their efforts to rescue the city foiled. Threatened by accountability and the end of the gravy train, the Charterists engaged in a sustained campaign of looting and sabotage. The greedy and corrupt coalition partners betrayed the DA, and the city fell again to those who had robbed it bare to begin with. All those gains in service delivery were lost, and the DA sunk to mere 39%, which was the same as the ANC got for that election. Party leaders like Athol Trollip defected to other parties. He's known, I think, Action SA. Yes, that's true. He's in Mashaba's party. And whereas there was only one option in the Western Cape 15 years ago, today there is the EFF. The ANC, if they don't get the deal they want, can always turn to the EFF, and the DA's voting share is declining. 22% is a hard national. 22% is a hard national support ceiling, and 53% in the Cape. After a long declining trend, the DA is headed for coalitions in its home turf too. They're already losing districts to emerging local parties, and votes are increasingly going to coloured identitarians like the National Socialistic Cape Coloured Congress and the nihilistic gangsterism of the Patriotic Alliance. Meanwhile, the governance quality of the Cape deteriorates as DA complacency gives way to sclerosis. Corruption scandals are being seized on even by ANC puppet organizations like De Lille's Good Party. Streetlights are going out in Paarl and there are potholes in Wellington. Billions in debt are becoming unpayable while open-ended local contracts are being made permanent. So the DA candidates are even starting to be assassinated due to internal competition. And here in the article, I linked to a recent case for the vice mayorship of Stellenbosch. So homicides in the Western Cape have also been climbing, and there are more trains destroyed by vandalism than anywhere else. Well, this is, of course, the ANC's fault. These are part of deliberate efforts to make the province ungovernable. But there are other efforts too, like the subsidized population influx, structured by ANC-directed land seizures to prevent coloureds from receiving housing they've waited for decades. ANC members, like I think it was Jimmy, was it Manye? I think it's Manye, was saying that there was an over-concentration of coloureds in the Western Cape, and they need to be sort of dispersed to match the rest of the country. Where were we? Beg your pardon. Yeah, so these problems are not going away. And as times drift on, the population becomes less white, less coloured, and less Indian. It also drifts radically more leftward. Terms like exclusion or inclusion, redress, and inequality dominate discourse, especially amongst junior party members on campuses who routinely denounce non-woke ideas and condemn conservatives. The tide is going in only one direction, and as those watching the universities of Cape Town, Stellenbosch, and Witwatersrand can tell you, there's a constant slide into left-wing radicalism, which now dominates every arena of social commentary or institutional reform. Even the private schools are falling to anti-white racism, as Richard Wilkinson's research will show you. And that's just the whites and the liberals. Since my days at university, when Rhodes Must Fall revolutionized the political discourse, genocidal rhetoric has become normalized, to the point that complaining about it in any context, even in the mouth of a leader of a major political party, is seen as racism. For the entire generation about to enter leadership, who form a majority of the voting age population, militant black nationalism is the default. You can't bargain with that. And the truth is, Cyril Ramaphosa promises many things to many people, including the radicals. For example, he promises prioritizing the party over the nation. And he's promised to complete the second phase of the National Democratic Revolution, which means expropriation without compensation, a one-party state, constitutional reform, and so on. I think trusting Cyril is naive. Corruption has not even slowed under his watch. It has, in fact, accelerated. It is he who has initiated renewed efforts to pursue expropriation of white property without compensation or a fair trial. Who's Cyril lying to, and why is it not you? The moderate, beg your pardon, the moderate so-called Tumamina faction of the ANC, as opposed to the radical Zumaist Radical Economic Transformation faction, or RET faction, can just as easily be seen as a Janus-faced money vacuum with no principles but survival. Ramaphosa has no ethnic base of his own, being a Venda, which is a very, very tiny minority. And so he appeals to the communists and the unionists as his party base in the party, and the oligarchs like his brother-in-law Patrice Motsepe and the old families Rupert, Oppenheimer, and Rothschild for his base outside of it. He parties with the World Economic Forum and the Russians and hopes to keep all of these doors open at the same time. Helen Zille quite correctly points out that the ANC, and in fact the police force and civil service, have become a vast system of interlocking criminal enterprises, and that the ANC branch votes are bought, competitors are assassinated, and that much of the criminal underworld is tied to the ANC directly or indirectly. She also spoke on the use of Russian money to buy votes. But, this is all true, but it is the consequences that she misses. What little order and structure exists in South Africa is the law of brutal patronage and violence, which the ANC commands. The rest of the economy is hollow. The volume of money funneled in from the British and American sources and from South African oligarchs like Rupert, Oppenheimer, and Rothschild was what got Ramaphosa his spot in the last leadership election in the first place. The powers mobilized in the last ANC leadership competition were vast, and hundreds of targeted assassinations occurred, mostly between rival taxi gangs attached to ANC factions. You don't hear anybody complaining about that, because Cyril was a favorite with foreigners, white leftists, and capitalists until his failures started piling up. Even the impotent MK Military Veterans Association managed to shut down half the country for 2 weeks last year just to keep their chief, Jacob Zuma, from prison. That vast criminal economy must turn somewhere, or it will turn to fight. The DA cannot play this game. They need the ANC to agree to hang itself in the courts and do nothing to prevent the dismantling of their whole world without pulling out enough Jenga pieces to topple the tower into civil war while giving immunity to collaborators. This is like doing surgery drunk. To even dream of getting close to this project, the DA needs to do two things. They need two things: a radically different vision and hard support from outside the party system, including massive enough funds to prevent David Mabuza from winning the upcoming ANC leadership contest. They think they have them both, the vision and the support, when in fact they have neither. So let's start with the first. The contest, as Helen Ziller puts it, is between non-racial constitutionalism and the rule of law on the one hand, and a totalitarian race nationalist one-party state on the other. Well, this is less substantial a basis for governing than she thinks. Even the other major theme of the DA's past manifestos, federalism, is an impotent one, and one that they've seldom implemented. Following the law and prosecuting corruption and setting the powers of the state in stone is something everybody believes in, even communist totalitarians. Rule of law is just what people call it when the laws agree with the moral intuitions of the ruling class, and those laws are enforced relatively consistently. Liberals tend to use it as a cipher for Western policy consensus. This is why black radicals are confused by the concept, as I argue in length in another essay linked in the article. And as we already have a constitution, one the DA believes in. But this constitution has smothered their very ambition, even as it is most sternly applied. It constrains provincial and municipal powers so precisely that only a constitutional amendment could devolve any power, killing the very idea of federalism they claim to believe in. And yet they only took until last year to take their very first steps in devolving power after 15 years of having power in the province. As for race, the Constitution allows for racial discrimination if that discrimination is, quote, fair. The Constitution, as its preamble states, stands for, quote, social justice, which means the collective redress and collective material equality. What the DA have left then is liberalism, but that isn't as sturdy a shield against racialism or wealth redistribution as it used to be, not that it ever really has been. In government, they are respected because they have managed to achieve, quote, service delivery in the Cape. This is a major achievement under current restrictions. I mean, the Constitution affords very little powers to the provinces. But this focus on so-called service delivery suggests that the primary aim of government is to give free stuff to the people, rather than to secure their collective security, cultural heritage, and moral beliefs. South Africa is just a blank slate to them. Only brute material issues matter. They do have a lot of respected policies, though, but these policies are respected because they look like the policies that the rest of the Western world has for all its social issues. The notion that policies being taken at this stage of Western liberalism are what produces its best qualities is like saying the best way to get a rose bush is to plant its flowers. You know, the DA's policy agenda is largely set by the very technically talented and intelligent, but fatally unimaginative Gwena. For example, see her DA policy conference 18 months ago. It's a long stream that I linked in the essay. Doesn't matter. Read it if you like. As the current DA mayor once explained, her career was made at the University of Cape Town on the Student Representative Council when she drafted the race and class quota acceptance policy that the university eventually adopted. Her mode of approach is that of so-called reasonable compromise with whatever the radical voices demand. This is not intentional, but it is a result of a major weakness, not just of Ngwenya, but of all her colleagues. Instead of reframing the aims of the national project or engaging in serious critiques of the political system, they aim to be the true standard bearers of the system as it is. To paraphrase the old Marxist cope, the real South Africa has never been tried. Ngwenya, more so than her colleagues, takes the position of advertising that she is the adult in the room by giving the children what they want, but in a more reasonable way. She cannot see nor articulate that the children want the wrong thing to begin with. Ngwenya's emphasis when speaking of non-racialism is not the most politically important aspect of it. That different races must, within a unitary republic, be treated equally before the law. That's a given. What she highlights is merely that racism is the problem of generalizations and stereotypes. This is how she thinks of it. And so she's perfectly comfortable with racial discrimination in the name of equality, leveling the relative material conditions between racial groups. And that's the same grand aim as the ANC. And as Western critical race theory, her endorsement of more sensible affirmative action policies ultimately have the same function and really only affirm the legitimacy of the claim to level, wealth between the races and seek redress. Terribly sorry. Shouldn't eat. No, sorry. This makes her remarks largely opaque to her colleagues. I'm talking about this, the distinction between when she says racial discrimination is bad, she's talking about stereotyping, but she's kind of okay with the law doing a bit of, a bit of affirmative action and BEE. Like the rest of her former prominent DA black liberals, Lindiwe Mazibuko, Mmusi Maimane, Herman Mashaba, she is a believer in the moral justifications for BEE, only that it needs like a bit of a tweak. It's easy, she seems to think. We just need to be pragmatic and explain it to people. It's obvious once you see it. In reality, this pragmatism is really a constant concession in the face of mounting forces of chaos. As proposals for open borders amnesty for illegal immigration demonstrates. Even the IRR sees the danger in this approach to race laws. Now, unfortunately, this makes the DA very much up to global standards. Much like the post-apartheid order did at a smaller scale, the prevailing ideas of the West, built in the ashes of the world wars, aim to undermine any capacity for ethnic or religious solidarity. It sees nationalism, and as a result of older revolutions, religion too, as dangerous. And so the West seeks to consolidate a global government out of international cooperation that will forever destroy the cultural bounds that made smaller political units disagree with each other. So, international wars, try to end that by making, countries smush together their economies and governments. Where the hell was I? And so the West seeks to consolidate a global government out of international cooperation that will forever destroy the cultural bounds that made smaller political units disagree with each other or able to articulate different aims or values politically. This is why, despite relying on them for support against Russia, the EU is still trying to punish Hungary and Poland for seeking out a more conservative vision for their nations. We in South Africa understand this problem at a deeper level because of its proximity. Racial and political disagreements, even violent ones or deadly ones, do not go away just because you achieve a monolithic government. They do not go away just because you have a socially liberal legal system, nor if you hand out generous social welfare, nor make everyone speak the same language, nor offer preferential treatment to those who have arrived from outside your political system. And Black Africans, especially if you listen to their intellectuals, the most incisive of which I think is Dumisa Dladla, are fully aware of the fact that South Africa is a Western system. To them, it is a colonial construct which perpetuates the order which subjugated them nearly 400 years ago. Even in 1994, the prominent struggle activist Phyllis Jordan articulated this much when she accused the ANC of being black bourgeoisie, aiming to join white society rather than overthrow it. It remains a fact that our Constitution is a Western one, based on the ideals of Western Enlightenment and mid-century American progressive liberalism. It also remains a fact that it is resented by most of the ANC's membership, and at least half of its leadership. This is because Black Africans still share a deeper political culture based on univocity. That is, consensus, not opposing parties. There must be unity at all costs. This favors single-party systems and entails hard solidarity, which is often coercively enforced. It also demands cultural homogeneity. It also means that everyone must speak the lingua franca, which means a black nationalist South Africa will be English. Others who live in their own communities or display a material advantage, earned or unearned, are seen as failing to demonstrate solidarity and must give back to the community or else. This suspicious and resentful attitude is all the stronger because of the history of white domination from colonization until the present. The trouble with the DA is that they happen to endorse political principles that are also essential to justifying the radical political program of their opponents, equality and historical racial redress. But when they sell Keynesian economics and social liberalism as a means of achieving this, they come across as insipid. Those on the ground who endorse their program of non-racialism just want to be left alone by their state and have clean, safe streets. Those who interact with them from the other side see this as a two-faced excuse for preserving privilege. And they aren't entirely mistaken. The battle amongst our elites does matter, without a doubt. Malema in government would be a rapid trip to catastrophe. But both parties back racial policies and norms of racial discrimination that lead to a despotic Afro-Saxon future, only on different timescales. And the increasingly woke West is there to lend a helping hand in that direction. That the Biden administration is, quote, woke is not a state secret, nor is it true that any Republican government has even once turned the clock back on even one leftist reform. And so it is no surprise that the West has turned to Ramaphosa for representation over the DA in 2019, a move which must have stung. It is even less of a surprise that the DA have reached for America recently for support. This is not going to work out the way they think. In my previous essay, I described a few dimensions of the DA's use of American patronage to build towards the 2024 electoral challenge, with a focus on the endorsement of the American foreign policy in Ukraine, which earned them a public endorsement from the American ambassador to the United States in the UN General Assembly. Previous efforts earned US aid finance for localization of electrical supply and for the Western Cape's vaccine effort. The first wave of such maneuvers was actually the gift of discount real estate through Wesgro for the key private partners of the American security state, Amazon, Google, Facebook, in exchange for a new transatlantic fiber cable. This was accompanied by a sycophantic attempt to chase COVID maximalism, during which DACVs collected a slew of plastic badges from World Economic Forum subsidiaries for their concerted effort to remain uncritical of the dishonest and politically motivated CDC pandemic guidelines. Now, in the link in that article, there's actually a description of an organization called Apolitical, which is run by the World Economic Forum, which finds people who are ideologically aligned around the world and gives them awards to sort of groom them for leadership placement in future. The second wave has hit under new Russian escalation of the Donbass war. Oh, by the way, Dime Mazibuko is in the part of the World Economic Forum. Interesting little point there. The second wave has hit under the new Russian escalation of the Donbass war. As Cyril Ramaphosa and his company took a nominal public stance of diplomatic neutrality, they also celebrated the invasion in private with cocktails at the Russian embassy. The DA took to an extravagant show of public condemnation of this, which has now included banning Russian diplomats from provincial public buildings. I mean, it's an empty gesture, but it's extremely hostile and unprecedented. This is a rare thing outside of Ukraine, an opposition party openly undermining the state's foreign policy and making their own. They picked a good moment, though. The United States is seeking total compliance in a final global push to either become an uncontested planetary hegemon and determiner of all policies on Earth by crushing the Russian economy, or else falling to second place in a multipolar world order in which their debt will become unserviceable following the loss of the dollar as a global reserve currency. It's too soon to tell which way it all goes, but the desperation of the moment makes American support all that more forceful. The reason for this effort by the DA is quite clear. The DA, which will never be capable of scoring higher than 25% of the vote, must seek bigger partners in order to negotiate a political settlement that can achieve reform. And for that, there is precedent in our past, in the early 90s. Former American ambassador Princeton Lyman opened his memoirs of his service in South Africa with reference to one event: the endorsement of the ANC and condemnation of the NP in the UN Security Council, requested by Mandela and granted by the Bush administration. What followed then was the lending to the ANC of the United States diplomatic clout during the height of their unipolar moment. As apartheid came to an end, foreign countries were instrumental to the effort to establish a unitary democracy. The Russians had financed the ANC's deadly People's War, the American USIA and Anglican Church were instrumental to the Black Consciousness movement, the whole world, both sides of the Iron Curtain, got behind sanctions, and the Anglo-American establishment defined many terms of the negotiation during transition. With this in mind, it's worth paying attention to the DA and their attempts to leverage American influence to gain power in South Africa. American influence has gotten us where we are. Fundamentally, our constitution and our official state ideology, against which the ANC has been struggling, is American, constitutional supremacy and progressive liberalism. Now, here's a little sort of quoted extract from an interview with former diplomat to South Africa, Princeton Lyman. So the interviewer asks, what is distinctive about the way in which we conduct foreign policy? And Lyman answers, there are two things that make us a bit distinctive. One is we do think of ourselves as a bit exceptional. And the second thing is that being now the only superpower, but even before a major power, has a major impact on how you carry out foreign policy and how you carry out diplomacy. On the one hand, there are no initiatives that go out that people don't want the United States involved because they feel if the US is involved, it will work. On the other hand, if we do get involved, there's a tendency to feel that that when we get involved, things have to get done our way. And the interviewer responds, and where do you think having your own way comes from? Is it out of our cultural history, or is it the power we have in the world? Well, I think it's partly the power we have in the world. I think it's, and this is one of the things I'm struck by in American foreign policy, you have a feeling that when you're negotiating for the United States, that you have to bring back something that is a good solution, but will pass muster with critics in Congress. So Lyman, talking about his experience in South Africa in specific, describes a situation in which the leaders were highly cognizant of the disasters in Somalia and Ethiopia, and thus had no desire to see the country on fire, even in the aftermath of Chris Hani's assassination. He also describes how the Rockefeller, Ford, and Carnegie foundations, which have close relations with the CIA and the State Department, steered the negotiation on behalf of American interests, and how the World Economic Forum, which is in fact a CIA cutout, convinced Mandela in 1991 that his political program would have to be scrapped. Quoting John Eikenberry, Lyman pointed to the global civil society as an instrument of American imperial hegemony. And that hegemony is increasingly progressive, or in that most ugly of terms, woke. Any part of the West that does not see the world in these terms is rapidly sidelined and attacked, as AfriForum is here and Poland and Hungary are in the EU. Even if they rely on these countries as a bulwark against Russia, and AfriForum is relied on as a bulwark against black supremacy. Even those looking for market liberalization amongst Western capital firms are dominated by ESG scores. These are investment criteria that are set by the US, the UN, and the biggest US Federal Reserve dependent investment fund, like BlackRock, which demands the same BEE/AA programs we do here, just with much smaller quotas and more environmental targets. So the biggest capitalist empires, like the Rothschilds family, now run woke firms like the so-called Council for Inclusive Capitalism. Having seen the surprisingly unfiltered social media posts of its members, I can assure you the Rothschilds, at least those in South Africa, are very woke. I mean, the one viewpoint that they have that's not very woke is they think that people should be it should be made illegal for people to have more than 2 children. That was something that Jonathan Rothschild posted a while back. Funny guy, that. And liberties in the West are easily abandoned for expediency and security. The internet is censored by social media companies attached to the American security state, even for the sake of securing electoral outcomes. Books are delisted by monopolistic distributors like Amazon, and mainstream media is centrally coordinated by only 2 organs, the Poynter Institute and the Trusted Media Initiative. Peaceful protest, such as anti-lockdown, can be crushed, and violent riots, like BLM and Antifa, endorsed and protected. Now, political critics can have their assets seized without a trial and blocked from the financial sector, like the Canadian truckers were. Terror suspects can be jailed and tortured without trial. 9/11 and 6th of January. This is the Western idea of rule of law under liberal constitutionalism. I mean, really, the idea that they have anything special going on like rights and shit is, for me, ludicrous. This dependence on the United States will foster the worst tendencies in the DA, both in terms of progressive liberalism and in terms of authoritarianism. Helen Zille herself is not averse to the draconian use of state power for mandatory vaccinations, on the basis of that old liberal policy that the state may intervene to prevent harm. But of course, if you redefine harm as risk and demonstrate that risk in such a complex and global world is in fact unbounded, then the justifications of power are infinite. This will mean the loss of what the classic liberals of the DA value. But it's also the only way that the DA minority government could possibly fund a cleanup of the country. It would require deploying a private security sector as state employees and waging a vast and bloody repression campaign against the charterists and criminal syndicates. Now, that requires US aid, and it requires the US to look the other way for a lot of ugly things. And that means America will call the shots. Now, this is the best case scenario that the DA have in front of them. It's like they cannot do anything that they want to do without US backing. And it comes with conditions that are unacceptable. So after the coalition deal is struck, a lot of people will feel betrayed, not least of which the smaller parties that they currently share share power with in Gauteng. I mean, they're in coalition government there. In power, the DA will have to perform an undiluted miracle, keeping the ANC from defecting to the EFF while prosecuting them all for corruption and fighting a guerrilla war against the forces of crime and charterism with mercenary violence and American money. They'll need to change the constitution to remove the possibility of racial discrimination. In the absence of miracles, the largely conservative white population will abandon the DA, and the black youth will flock to the EFF. ANC members will swing hard to the RET faction, as their narrative of white monopoly capital being the real state capture will suddenly hold a lot of water. The black radicals will make a comeback with a vengeance. And after this deal, the DA will have destroyed the credibility of themselves and the moderates in the ANC, and the likelihood of them achieving what needs to be done are essentially zero. They haven't the bargaining power to ask for what they need. The cape will be gone because the DA will no longer be able to govern it again, and with them goes all the honest bureaucratic experience left in the country. And then the future will fall to the Solidariteit movement and the corporate walled-off enclaves in the major cities, those, private little hamlets with private security and the big walls, keeping the spice flowing by bribing political gangsters. And that's a bitter future. The ANC have made South Africa ungovernable for the foreseeable future, and the endgame is Zimbabwe. On the other hand, there is more immediate, painful solution that could save at least some of our country, and that's to endorse Cape independence. The rest of South Africa is bound to pursue the ideas of black consciousness, and Azania, as they like to call themselves, will make or break their future on their own terms, not that of an intransigent Anglo minority. Fail or succeed, black South Africans will own their future as honorable men, not trustees of some post-colonial white man's burden. I am for Cape independence, it's no secret, and I don't think it will be possible after 5 more years of demographic change, driven as it is by racial discrimination in the job market and by shack farming and land theft by the ANC. To work the miracles they need, the DA will need to centralize power so extremely that federalism will become a thing of the past, and any failure will destroy the hopes of even regional autonomy. I implore you all to seize the opportunity now for a chance to give the colored people not just a meaningless ballot, but a real electoral power, a say in their future that matters, to give Afrikaners the possibility of a state that honors their language and culture, and to Muslims, one that protects a 300-year-old harmony, a state that bears the marks of the best English constitutionalism without its sinister leftward tendencies. This will bring about a future for minorities who seek a future away from the fetid ruins of post-colonial Africa and the greying edifices of the sterile and decadent West. A future in which the leftward tilt of history can be stopped or even reversed, at least in one corner of the earth, will be worth it. A small, neutral country on the further southern reaches, sipping the passing nectar of free ocean trade, aloof from the violence of world politics, with no mineral resources to be envied, and no ties to great powers or old blood feuds. A free Cape. All right, so that's my thingamajiggy. So, we haven't had a lot of people in the chat, so pretty much all of you, if you have a question to ask, will be able to ask it. It's being asked. So I'm just going to go straight into the chat and just read everyone in sequence. And apologies for being late, guys. Anywho, first question is Wellington having blackouts at the moment? Do you need some candles, Rob? Yeah, actually, I am sitting here in the dark. I'm using mobile data, but my laptop is fully charged, so I anticipated I'd last through this. True Capitalist Investor asks, but the ANC-DA coalition is a great idea. The ANC receive foreign clout while the DA can sell out their voters. Yeah. You laugh and then you cry. The DA will be just a domestic worker for the ANC, says Dagbreker. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you become a useless appendix, you know. I mean, like, what clout will they have? I mean, anytime they differ on anything, you know, the ANC goes, but there's the EFF, you know, they're not going to tell us to shove it up our asses, you know. Ooh, lovely cheap wine. I feel like a carcass in the country and hyenas are chomping at each other's faces in an attempt to get a piece of what's left. Yeah, pretty much. Constantly disgusted. Sideliner Opinions says the DA's problem is that their liberalism's end game is always socialism because there is no such thing as conservative progressive liberalism, which could make a liberalism static to make it endurable. The DA must choose between American progressive liberalism and African conservatism. If they choose liberalism, jumping in bed with the ANC-SACP is their only logical option. Interesting. That's interesting. African conservatism. Yeah, there's no way they'll adopt it. They're way too liberal globalist. They'd rather spike the country than we get a bad mark on their CVs. Sorry, eating. What happens to SA next year when grain prices are 10 times the price? Well, everything will get fucked really rapidly. That's what. But yeah, it will get fucked really rapidly. Increase of urbanization for sure, but then there'll be food shortages in the cities, and then there's going to be violence that breaks out. And yeah, we might see the loss of one major city at least, probably Durban. Actually, no, Durban and Johannesburg can't afford to be lost because I mean they still would be lost anyway. But I mean, like the economy can't afford to lose it. And so the major oligarchs will probably deploy. You'll probably see a huge outpouring of money for private security that will basically be allowed to break the laws in securing public law and order. But I mean, there's a certain ceiling on this. You know, I mean, it's not like they're going to come into your neighborhoods and make them peaceful. What they're going to do is make sure that, you know, transport can make its way through. But at a certain point, the cost benefit of analysis becomes really bad, and they're just going to let it go and disinvest. So, yeah, I mean, anything could come out. It depends on how expensive it is to do any of this shit, you know. The DA has been lured into a liberal globalist team where sideline opinions are saying this. They've been lured into a liberal globalist team with a failing tripartite alliance. Has been the flagship since '94. The DA must now provide the intellectual backbone that the tripartite alliance currently lacks. Well, they don't have any intellectual backbone. I mean, for crying out loud, you know, DA, they claim to be liberal, and then they give you halfway. They took until last year, was it the year before last, to publicly say that they stand for non-racialism absolutely and will oppose all racially discriminatory laws. I mean, look, Tony Leon said that back in the day, but you know, then they went back on it the second he left. There's not much. Look, Helen Ziller has a bit of backbone in the DA, but she got too creative when she got involved with that whole Musi Maimane thing. I mean, I don't think that that was an appropriate move by anyone's standards. I don't think anyone could have sort of thought that was a good idea. I can't see a bloody thing. My candle's just gone out. Hang on. Okay, there we go. And then there was light. This new hegemony is pretty much transnationalism. Well, it's been transnationalism since 1945. I mean, I'm constantly baffled. You know, you get these people who talk about a new world order and stuff like that. Like, ooh, conspiracy, you know. I'm always completely confused by these people. How did you not notice that the whole world order since 1945 is that's the new world order? I mean, like, it's been around, you know. And the idea is the idea that legitimizes it amongst others, and I think probably the most powerful one for people who are like state leaders, is that without this, we'll all fall. We're going to have like the Second World War will repeat itself. It's complete nonsense. Okay. Robert King, nice to see you, my man. Says Cape secession is the only available option that won't lead to the complete destruction of everything. Yes, I think that one should save at least the part of South Africa that can be saved. You know, any piece that can be saved should be saved. You cannot save any part that is majority black, I'm afraid, because the whole political system, everyone who is involved in any area of politics in black communities now supports racial redistribution. They support hard, like really, really heavy, generous socialism that's completely politically unaffordable. And it's not sustainable, and you can't change. You can't teach people economics and sort of advanced constitutional theory overnight. It's not feasible. So anyway, if the DA becomes a sideline opinion says if the DA becomes government with the tripartite alliance, SA will be run like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada under COVID. I don't think so. I think they might get slightly more competent, but I think the reality is that you simply cannot run South Africa anymore. It's fatally broken. I think that the problem is that you'd have so much violent pushback from the disgruntled, deposed members of the ANC that it would be. You'd probably the country might risk actually falling into permanent dissolution. Why would the tripartite alliance jump in bed with the DA if they can maintain some dominance by flirting with the EFF? Exactly. I don't know why they would. I think it depends who pays more money in the upcoming leadership challenge in the ANC. Why is it so difficult to form a strong centre-right conservative party in South Africa? Well, because everybody who is in charge of the country is a left-wing lunatic. All of the old guard have either sort of fallen into retirement or disappeared overseas. The next generations were raised with like this under a complete cultural revolution. No one can contemplate the idea of conservatism. The ANC, as well, to understand the stranglehold they hold on South African politics, there is no competition that is allowed to be formed. Like, no one can get it going. The ANC will absolutely crush you. They will terrorize you in the townships. Starting a new political organization is nightmarish in South Africa in black communities. And if you have real backing, if you have real substantial backing, like the ATM did, they basically what they did to the ATM is they paid for thousands of their members to join the ATM, call an AGM, and have the party dissolved. This is Jesse Duarte around this thing. It's absolutely nuts. I must try and find that article because it's a really interesting episode in watching how creative the ANC can get. So, Robert King says the risk that few people seem to talk about is the minor threat of a DA-ANC coalition at the provincial level to keep out the secessionist parties and maintain the present order. Now, that is something that I have been afraid of for some time because, Helen Ziller has told me that she thinks that any form of Cape secession means civil war. I don't know if she really believes that. Maybe she does. I think she feels like she has to believe that because I don't know. I mean, try and imagine that. You dedicate your life to saving a country and then you have to like abandon it and just like chop off your arm. I don't think it's so easy even for young people. Like, I find it really emotionally like, it was hectic deciding to back Cape Independence. I believe in Cape Independence now, but I'm from the Cape, and even still, I mean, I had to go through an absolutely harrowing sort of departure from, national identity before I was receptive to such an idea. Anyway, um, but I mean, like so Helen Zille, she's likely to do so. She's likely to. I mean, but think about it this way as well. What if the ANC makes it a stipulation that in order to join the coalition, they have to extend the coalition to the Cape Province, so they run every branch of government together as an uncontested fusion. I mean, this is what happened in the 20s when the Nationalist Party came about, and they had a one term where they wrested power away from the SAP. That was Jan Smuts's party, and then they fused into the United Party, and after a few years, you had the was it gereformeerde Nasionale Partij? That's the one that ended up being the one that ruled the country. Is people got sick of working with Jan Smuts and they broke away to form a new party that had a new vision. But this idea of when the government's in crisis, they fuse and form a new coalition. Now, I mean, the Nationalist Party didn't do that. The way they did it is they gerrymandered all the constituencies to hold on to power. ANC can't get away with doing that. So, one thing to be mildly optimistic about. Although if they get really panicked, they'll just stuff the ballots like Sonic BF did. So JCDF2. I am never going to remember that name. So you're optimistic about the future of South Africa. So did you miss a word and you say your optimistic vision, or do you mean to say you are optimistic about the future of South Africa? Question mark. I can answer both. My optimistic vision is Cape Independence. Am I sort of in an absolute sense optimistic? No, I am not. But here's the solution, and I feel like loyalty to this place, loyalty to these people, loyalty to this country is important to me. If it's over, it's over. But I am, if it's over, it's over. That's just it. But I mean, for me, there's a fallback, and then that would be the sort of Afrikaans nationalist internal resettlement plans, which I would pimp like an absolute zealot. If the Cape became an impossible option and a shutdown and it's over, I'm going full on board with that stuff. Afrikaans being the language of the future, consolidation, all of that. I'd go hardcore for that. But for now, I prefer the I prefer the sort of non-racial sort of Cape solution, because like these are my people, But there's concentric circles of loyalty. So, SweatMG, you only you all need to build a battery pack like in a big camper, and when it's on storage, so when it's out, you can use it. Oh, you're talking about load shedding? Okay. Maybe. Does SA receive much grain or food from Ukraine, Russia? No, zero. Actually, most of our imports, we get a lot of our grain from the Western Cape, actually. And there's a fair amount of imports, agricultural imports from Germany. Funnily enough, we got a really big partnership with Germany. Have been very good. I would say Western Europe is actually the biggest sort of partner. Sicknick asks, Robert, what's the state of non-cucked Afrikaner Protestantism and Christianity in South Africa? I'm of the opinion that any secession movement is going to require organized biblical Christianity for cohesion. Well, look, that's a long-term project. In the meantime, you can simply build it on a negative vision. We do not want domination by we do not want domination under black supremacy. We do not want socialism. We do not want the ANC. Clear them out, clear them out, clear them out. So that's basically something that a lot of people can get behind. In the long term, though, I think you might be right. But, white people will never be the majority in the Western Cape. Well, not never, but are extremely unlikely to become a majority in the Western Cape. The majority will be colored. And what that means is that the colored people, the solidarity, as you say, behind, strong Protestant Christianity, that's actually the most likely sort of, that and Afrikaans language, that's most likely to be the point of commonality across the country as it goes into independence. And I mean, it's got a lot of appeal. A lot of the working class people are very, very, very socially conservative. True Capitalist Investor says, I'm very worried because potash, potassium, and nitrates are in such short supply. It's not that nitrogen-based fertilizers are too expensive. They aren't even being made. That's true. Why the hell nobody's recycling the nitrates and phosphates in our sewage is beyond me. It's a massive gold mine that's going to, would give you amazing food security. I mean, especially now that, the price of these things has actually been climbing for quite some time. And known mineral reserves have been depleted a lot. I mean, the thing is that we don't actually import from Russia and Ukraine, but it's going to have a total effect on the global market. It's going to drive up the price whether we're getting most of our Oh, 20% of our wheat imports are from Russia, Ukraine. Really? Well, I am mistaken then. My memory is faulty. So it's kudos to you. Where am I? Oh yeah. The world can only support the population of the early 90s, about 6 to 6.5 billion people, based on the current amount of fertilizers being produced due to the disruptions of the Ukrainian war. Interesting. I mean, that's plausible to me. I mean, like I'd have to check your calculations, but that sounds plausible, actually. Yeah. I mean, nitrogen is in urine. I was like, why aren't we recycling our sewage? Well, because people are stupid. What concerns me about the DA is they have, Dachbreker says, what concerns me about the DA is they have a strong push for a transnational neo-Victorianism. It's a weird thing to say. I'll have to think about that. It just crushes all smaller cultures to make everything homogenous. Yeah, pretty much. It really is a sort of, they really have a Cecil Rhodes outlook. It's sort of like, well, it's almost as if to say, well, we Anglos are naturally superior, but with a little bit of training, the African be our little brother and will come along. He'll be a good fella. I'm not so sure that works. I'm not so sure that that's a workable mindset, A few weeks ago here in MSM, they talked about a power shortage last year, like it was already a problem here. And that sentence construction does not help me out, my friend. Blazing Koala said, I'm going to stop at 9. Hey, I'm going to stop at 9 o'clock. I'm trying to get through these as quickly as possible. As one of the key progenitors of what became the UN, was Jan Smuts a bad actor / one of the sinister New World Order globalists? Really not sinister. I think he was sort of vain and ambitious is the best way to describe him. And he collaborate. If Carroll Quigley is to be believed, he did collaborate with Rhodes and Milner's little circle, secret society. But he just really believed in this stuff. I mean, like at an extraordinarily deep level. He published a book in 1926 called Holism and Evolution, where he laid out this whole philosophy. It's sort of related to German idealism, but also to a school of thought called New England Transcendentalism, where basically he argued about how all matter, life and mind in the universe is bending ever more to evolve into greater and more unified wholes. And sort of that in the way that a personality develops, so does the universe, and he would use this phrase in public speeches, the development of the human personality in a collective sense, as well as an individual sense. So, his thing went very deep. And the conclusion of this book is that the highest form of organization of matter, mind, and life in the universe was the United Nations. He, at the time, League of Nations. So then he pushed really hard for it to become a really sort of penetrative government. But these are ideas he formed at the end of the 19th century when he was in college in Cambridge. So it's not like these ideas were completely, sort of bought off him. He was a true believer in this kind of stuff. Cape secession would lead to civil war, says true capitalist investor. The ANC would not let the cow come on. The ANC has no fucking physical mobilization capacity. They can do a little bit of sabotage, but that's it. If the international community accepts the Cape, and it doesn't have to be many, it just has to be one or two sort of reasonable members of the West, and you have to get de facto independence. It just means basically you declare independence, you get the security to function a little bit. I promise you, that's really going to be the least of your problems. I mean, you have to understand the amount of violence we face already. Like, parts of the Cape Flats have homicide rates that are higher than the death rate at the front lines of World War II. So, you're not, this is not something to worry about as much. In fact, it's likely that it will immediately bring a great deal more order, because it will lend confidence to a large number of people to take their communities back and so on. And also, private security can get drafted by the state, and then, the fact that the ANC is policing the amount of shit that you can do. I mean, you have no idea how bad our military are. You had people steal a fucking satellite, a bunch of tuck junkies stealing a satellite dish for scrap metal out of the naval base. That's the level we're on. ANC can't do a thing, my man. Do not even fear. If you want to see how bad they are, look what happened in the riots last year in Durban. They didn't even show up until, they're completely useless, dude. The police stations had to be bailed out by middle-class citizens with shotguns, fending off looters and rioters. It's like, no, my man. It's not going to lead to civil war. There'll be skirmishes, there'll be terrorism, there'll be riots, but that's not going to change from the existing texture of South Africa. It's just going to give it a different sort of pattern. So, Robert King says, I expect that when South Africa collapses, it will lead to a domino effect across sub-Saharan Africa, leading to a chaotic tribal dark age. Maybe. I mean, look, if you were Botswana and you were smart, you'd immediately sort of invade northern South Africa as a peacekeeping operation and take as many of the Tswana-speaking regions as you could. But that's just me. That's what I would do. Peacekeeping. Greater Botswana, here we come. Yeah. Where are we? Oh, yeah. True capitalist, blah, blah, blah. Wait, what statement? Kermit GG says, that statement caught me a bit off guard. I don't know what you're referring to, my friend. Ronel Gush, or Gush, says, Cape Independence could not answer my question regarding the current political system being pulled through into a new country. We will deal with it when we get there. It's not an answer. Correct. That is absolutely correct. I mean, look, I have some half-formed ideas about this. I mean, personally, I don't think that I mean, look, while the nature of the Constitution is very important, I think that it's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the reforms that you managed to push through during the interregnum. So there's going to be like a period of between 5 years and 10 years where you can you're going to have to do some really hectic reforms. So you're going to need a lot of centralized power, you're going to need a lot of intervention, and you're going to need to make things work. And then you can introduce a status quo. And I think that's actually the crucial period. The big reforms that you make are going to be ones that a lot of them are going to be informal, and not many of them are going to be legally mandated. And the form of the country will sort of evolve over time. But if you get that sort of crucial sort of reformation period right, you can do a lot of good for a long period of time. And it will also shape what kind of ideas are constitutionally possible for the final national constitution. So what you really want is you want a lot of devolution. You want a lot of sort of checks on redistributive policy. You want very, very heavy duty guarantees for property rights. You definitely want to have very sort of flexible. You want really, really good executive control over foreign policy and border security. So I mean, like direct accountability to the presidency. That's the way I'd put it. Is like you delineate areas. There's whole areas which the president is responsible. Like you have you'd have I mean, like in an ideal world, I'd divide the executive into two branches, and you have a domestic, an inward-facing, and an outward-facing executive. And so the outward-facing executive would be called something like, the national protector or something. Or, I don't know. It doesn't matter. And then their responsibility is foreign trade border security, things like that. Diplomatic policies, all that, and then you have a sort of head of government who handles most issues except for monetary policy, which has to be a joint issue, I think. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be debated, and there's a lot of people I would consult with on many of these questions. I like devolution. I like local powers. I think it's necessary in South Africa to keep people honest, because a lot of these, when you're governing a large area, the temptations to become detached from ordinary people is too high. I love the GK Chesterton accent. What Chesterton accent? I'm not sure what you mean. Anyway, what lessons have you drawn from the Ukraine that you could apply to South African civil war? None whatsoever. There are no conventional military powers here whatsoever. All the lessons about how South Africa will be fought can be learned from wars that have already occurred in this region, like the Chimurenga, like the border. Well, no, the border wars are not a good example. The People's War, wars in Mozambique. So, I mean, any war in Africa will offer you some glimpse into what you can expect. But again, South Africa is unique. We wage war in a different way. Much more disorganized. But as society crumbles, you'll start to see more sort of armed roadblocks. That's going to be a real issue, because then trading goods from town to a major issue. So imagine like all of the trade problems of pre-unification Germany, but except instead of like little tiny weeny tolls, it's it's completely unfixed, and there's marauding and bandits everywhere, and some of the people at the checkpoints will kill you for no good reason. Yeah, it's going to be very dirty. Given South Africa's strategic importance to the West, this will make sure you take the smallest hit out of the African countries. Well, perhaps, but we're also of importance to the Far East. So swings and roundabouts, there's upsides and downsides, and South Africa is right in the middle of everything. Neither here nor there. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It's sort of that when people say that, we're going to. I agree with Dagbreek and Ronalgish. People who say it's going to be fine. Look, I would give Phil Craig and his way of communicating some leeway, because personally, I think, look, you cannot avoid trying to give people an open-ended solution, because he's not a political party. He's not a political theorist. He's just trying to make the case for Cape independence as such. And it's an entirely negative vision. And he says, well, look, it's for the Cape people to decide how they shape their government. And I think, you can't object to that. If you're worried about this kind of stuff, then, think about it yourselves. Think about ideas. Think about what you'd like to see. But sort of also remember that not everything is possible, and you're going to have to things are going to have to be bootstrapped and shoestring, but bootstrapped a lot, and there's going to be a lot of shoestring budget stuff and a lot of mend and make do. Basically, in transitions like this, one has to MacGyver things together, and so you have to have a sort of MacGyver attitude to solving all of your problems in front of you. And I think that's the best way to think about most political solutions. Is there's always going to be a tension between people who look at pure expediency and say things like, well, this is the easiest path forward, even if it's absolutely the wrong one. And then you'll have people who will say this is absolutely the right way to go, even though it's completely impossible. And between the two, you have this whole zone where you can get really creative, and you say, well, okay, what is the minimum necessary shit that we have to get done now? It's this, whatever it is. And then you sort of say, okay, well, what's necessary to get us there, and what tools do we have in front of us that we can use? And then think that way, instead of trying to have rigid formulas. So that's general. So when I talk about, okay, Cape becomes independent, deputize the private security, use them to clean up the criminal networks in the slums, it's because, well, that's what's lying there. That's the thing that's there. You can't just sort of take the policeman that the ANC have put in front of you and say, all right, guys, I mean, your days of smoking tick with the local gangsters and taking bribes are over. Come join the party, the Justice Party, and do some justice. They're going to laugh at you, my man. No one's going to cooperate. So there's going to have to be some clearing out of stables. There's a lot of bullshit lying around. Steve says South Africa used to have some of the best light infantry units in the world. Indeed we did, but we don't know more. The role of the CIAG is to try and unite in some way the different independent organizations, Robert King says. Yeah, that's true. I'm involved with Cape Exit to some degree, but they're very impressive in some ways, but in others, I have some criticisms about their policies. I'll keep that to myself until I've had lengthier discussions about with the members. But I have some niggles. Everyone knows I've got strong opinions about policies one way or the other, but I'm not going to go and, Anywho, preparing for drones coming everywhere. It's funny. I have a friend that I met a while back who said something interesting. He said he was talking about a new war doctrine, where basically you do drone decapitation, and he was talking about stuff like sending drones to attack Julius Malema's house and have him killed. And he says, "Oh, you just need two, and you send one to break through the windows, and then the other one goes and finds him in the house and blows his head off." So yeah. Oh, true capitalist investor. Yeah, I did mention tax revolt. That's just too difficult. I'm actually involved with the last best hope we had was something run by what's his name, Willem Petzer, and I joined his group for like 2 weeks, and then it fizzled out. He employed me to do a giant stack of articles. It was a tall order. I worked very hard on that stuff. Every day you wanted at least one article through, and they all had to have academic citations, and then they had to have propaganda value, because the people, and I understand the people, they need to understand things what are nearer to their home. So he gave me this whole thing where I had to have things that are very bread and butter issues that would make people skrik, but was also it had academic quality citations. So it was like I had to provide hardcore research that also was exciting. That was really difficult. I mean, it's up on my blog. He only published one of those articles, not under my name, and then just let the rest sit. And so I was like, after a point, I was like, nah, dude, I'm just going to stick them up on my blog. I mean, it was a good 2 weeks. I got paid for it, but I mean, I was very disappointed because it was really promising what he was getting going, and it just went nowhere. And I don't know what he's doing with people's money, honestly. Maybe he'll come back, maybe he won't. I don't know. Taxpayers Union went way of the dinosaurs, it sounds like. I mean, look, he might correct me. And I hope he does, because we need that. But I don't know. Looking at ratepayers associations locally, these people are suffering because nobody wants to participate. I mean, here in Wellington, we've got of all of the DA governments, we're one of the worst run. And what are they doing? We're sitting here and you can barely get 4 signatures for anything that you want. If you want to get anything done, you have to do all of the fucking work yourself. I mean, there's there's this development up on the river, and the number of people involved in actually working to get this thing done. There's maybe 5, 6 of us, and we've got to basically do everything. And it's like 2 of us have managed to locate endangered species that are in the river. I had to do a whole report where I had to take down this. It doesn't matter. It's hard work, because it's always going to be a tiny, tiny minority of the people who do any work at all, and you can't. And so the thing is, you've got to work based on the fact that everyone is disillusioned, doesn't care, hopeless. There's no future. I mean, look, maybe once it gets much worse, much quicker, people will start to really feel the fire under their bums and make a move. But then they could also end up making a move to the first world and emigrating. I mean, last 5 years, 1 million people have left South Africa. It's not the dregs of society that are leaving South Africa. It's the cream of the crop. So that's why we have so little time. But I mean, after a certain point, you're just going to go, screw it. We fight. And we're going to one has to carve out a piece of land for oneself and make it work. And either that's going to be the Cape, or it's going to be some little chunks of Afrikanerdom. And, you know, honestly, I'm here for either of those, because I'm not going to go live in some Wokistan in the first world. I mean, I could conceive of like retiring as some kind of intellectual refugee or some nonsense to, you know, Hungary or Japan or Poland or something. Maybe even the Netherlands, because the Netherlands is really nice in many ways. But you know, before I run away to do something like that, my first remit is that I've got to put an honest effort in. That's just for the sake of my own, you know, mental well-being. I have to put a concerted effort into doing what I can while I'm here. And yeah, like Jefferson. That's funny. But I think you know, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't put in an honest effort into trying to do something good for this country. And I'm glad that I work for the organization that I do. I'm very proud of it. I know that I'm not doing the best work that I could possibly do, you know, if I was perfect, but also I'm not perfect. I'm not switched on 24/7, and sometimes it can be a bit much. But you know, we're going to make it happen. We're going to get something done. Anyway, I have work to do still tonight, so I'm going to ring off on you guys. Anyway, best of luck.